Vlad, thanks so
Cool.
much for joining us on the first MakePad podcast. I just sort of said that this is the first time I'm doing this, so bear with me. But yeah, welcome.
Thanks, Ben. Great to be here.
Yeah, cheers. So I know what Webflow is, and I think probably a lot of people who will listen/watch this will probably already know what Webflow is. So why don't you just give us the quick version? I know you've been on multiple podcasts recently, so let's get the quick version of what Webflow is.
Sure. It's kind of funny. If you pull up probably 10 different podcasts that I've been on, it's never been the same. I mean, Webflow started as a website builder. I mean, we want to be just like Wix, Weebly, etc. But now we think of Webflow as a visual development environment. Like it's a place where you can develop software visually, and now it's a subset of software, mostly targeted to websites and data-driven applications, but we're working on making it a complete alternative to writing code. So we see ourselves as a no-code alternative to creating software. And a lot of people see us as like, okay, great, you said that, but I can't make XYZ. There's many years ahead where we want to fill in those gaps, but today Webflow is amazing. Like I would say, completely ready for all kinds of really complex marketing use cases, creating marketing sites, getting rid of the need to rely on engineering to make updates to your marketing site, and build it in a way that's like super, super custom. So the main difference between Webflow and other website builders is that you can build anything that you can imagine. Essentially anything you can do with code, you can do with Webflow without coding.
Awesome.
It's not like those usual, click and drag some boxes around and then pick a template type of site builders.
Yeah, and I think when I first came across Webflow, I was working at Product Hunt at the time. It was one of your several launches, I believe. And yeah, I guess then was like your focus on designers. It was like a design tool, right? And then I think it's only recently, since you raised the Series A and you had like your redesigned side, that it was it break the code barrier. So now it's
Yep.
more like focusing around this notion of not using code. So what was behind the thought there? Did you sort of see the market and then follow it, or try and push it, or how did that come around?
Believe it or not, it's kind of coincidental, because we started on this journey of, going beyond websites into more complex applications. I was looking back at my notes. The first sketch around it was maybe 5.5 years ago, where, I mean, we were probably a little too ambitious. This was before we even built the CMS. But it was already the same vision of how do we abstract away the hardest parts of building software and put them into not just designers' hands, but into the hands of all creators, people who just want to create a business, create products, service, etc. You don't necessarily have to be a great designer to do that. So it just kind of all coalesced around the fundraise, and it all made sense to kind of, and especially with NoCode Conf, because we already known that we were going to be doing that when we released a new website. So kind of leading into this new movement of no-code software development.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I've been doing no-code building before it was cool or trendy.
Yeah.
I think it was just sort of last year when...
Wait, you're saying it's cool now?
Well, I'm pretending for myself that at least
I see.
I'm going to say cool.
Makes us both feel better. Got it.
Yeah, exactly. Because otherwise, what would we be doing?
Yeah.
Speaking of, what should we call it? It's not no code, and you and I both, I think, agree on the fact that no code probably means there's going to be so many more developers to build other stuff.
Yeah.
And you're not just not using code; you're just building. It's on top of it's an abstraction of it, right? So
right.
We're stuck with it now, it seems.
I don't know. Maybe we're not. I really hate the name, but everyone seems to be using it. So it is we're kind of between a rock and a hard place. I do like something on the order of like visual software development, but that's so wordy and so long.
It's not as catchy, is it?
Yeah, exactly. Hard to. It's more descriptive, but it doesn't fit in a hashtag.
No, exactly. Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's a shame that it's called no code, but I think the early users of the no code space
Yeah.
almost that's the thing that drew them to it, thinking, well, I can't code, so I don't
Hmm.
need to know how to
Yeah.
code, and I can use this thing. Have you seen like? Do you think this first wave of the no coders seem to be
Hmm.
the same? Like you talked about user personas for Webflow being sort of freelancers or
Yeah.
marketing teams and things like that. I think we have been sort of typical personas around who has signed up for MakerPad and
Hmm.
who's using it. Do you think there's the biggest wave and the wave that sort of will push this forward is probably the maker or want to be maker who couldn't code and now all of a sudden can do things without needing to?
It's hard to say. I think the vast volume is going to be there. I think the business case is still more around like larger businesses, especially when these tools mature to the point where they're solving a real problem, especially if they allow you to do something really valuable without having to hire another person, for example. If you can push out a lot of marketing changes with just a designer, not a designer and an engineer, that allows that engineer to go work on the product, etc. Um, but I do fundamentally believe that the vast majority of people who are going to be building software haven't even discovered this practice yet. So it's going to be tens, if not hundreds of millions, if not billions of people discovering the power of this stuff as it gets more mature. And then I think it's like personal computers. It'll be like a broad mix of like who's using it, right? Some people are going to be using it to track their like home chores, and create something that kind of like sets up notifications when a kid doesn't do their chores or whatever. And some people are going to be using it to run like, oil rig maintenance installations that like provide millions of dollars in value, and are mission critical. So I just like spreadsheets, right? Like spreadsheets were a toy initially. They were a joke. Like programmers would make fun of like, oh yeah, you're going to do financial modeling in this like, graphic design tool basically. And now, there's multi-billion dollar, workflows that are powered by spreadsheets, and there are more than a billion users of spreadsheets. And it's not a toy anymore, right? It could be seen as a toy, but it's a much more valuable tool set now.
Yeah, I think I was talking to someone the other day saying, if I was explaining this to my brother and he would say, if you wanted to, he's a personal trainer, and if you wanted to build an app for his personal training,
Hmm.
he's not typing in or searching, how do I build this without code? He's not, because
Hmm.
he's not thinking, well, I'm going to do it with code
Yeah.
otherwise, because
Hmm.
he just thinks, I want to
I
build
want to
this
build
app.
this. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it'd be
Yeah.
interesting to see how that language comes around, and maybe that's when the no code branding changes. We'll have to see. What
Yeah.
you say there's so many different use cases for using no code tools internally, externally, for many different types of like use cases, and we'll get
Hmm.
into that a bit later. But I'm interested in what no code workflows do Webflow use. Like you see all
Ooh.
this stuff, so you
Yeah.
must use a bunch.
Yeah. Honestly, I'm not the best person to ask. I know we have a ton of like Zapier integrations. We use like Integromat. We use a ton of Airtable stuff. We power our entire internal team site. We call it Webflowpedia, like where you can see all the teams, all team news, like what new people as they're joining. All of that is powered by Webflow. Like typically, Stripe has a whole team around this, and they have like software engineers creating these things. Um, uh, and I mean, a ton of our product designers use Webflow to like design the actual product. So that was something that many times they were using, something closer to Figma, et cetera. I mean, we still use all those tools too. So I mean, we definitely eat our own dog food, whatever that expression is.
Yeah.
But and the first solution to everything, like if you look at our people team, like when they have so many different workflows for like approving salaries and creating new offers and all that stuff, like typically that would be either a manual process, but right now it's all kind of like using these these no-code workflows, whether it's just like a Google form that then goes to a specific database that then calls an API through Zapier, et cetera. That's a pretty big shift when you have somebody that's not even in IT creating these solutions to make their life easier.
Yeah, for sure. I think someone on your team, I think Ben Parker introduced me to someone, I can't remember his name now, which is awful of me. And he built like the internal, what you need to learn when you join Webflow.
Oh, yeah. Micah. Yeah. He built an entire LMS, like learning management system with
it was
like
insane.
upvoting and scoring, and you could follow your progress. Yeah. It was wild. I couldn't believe that.
Yeah, I remember he showed me when I was early in building MakePad, and he was like, yeah, you can do it like this. And I was like, I think that's a bit more technical than what I'm built for.
Yeah.
But it was,
Yeah.
I remember seeing it. It was awesome.
Yeah. Even now, like a lot of the things you have to do, to tie these tools together, you essentially have to be like a software engineer light. You kind of have to map in your head how all these things are coming across. There's a lot of work that is still ahead of us to make it a lot simpler.
Yeah, I
And
think, I've been talking on some podcasts I've done recently. I don't want to like insult programmers because I'm not one, but I'm thinking that surely the building blocks are sort of the same in the way you have to think about it. So if I was building a feature like our profiles recently was, I have to set something up, I have to like start with the front stuff, the connectors, the databases, how do they all work, what's all the onboarding flow, and then test it with a few people. Oh no, it breaks. What's this Zapier thing? How can I fix it? And then do it again. Someone else does something, like a user does something that is stupid to me, but that's how they use it. And then like, can I fix it again? Like the whole process seems the same. It's just, the way I'm doing it.
Right. Yeah. It's the way I sometimes think about it is, this isn't like a magical thing where like any creator will be able to create whatever they want in 5 minutes, as much as we want to promise that. The way I think about it is a little bit like QuickBooks works, right? You can run your own books, right? Install QuickBooks or to set up your chart of accounts and learn, but you have to learn about accounting. You have to kind of understand the core principles of, when you take money from here, you got to like offset it here. And ultimately over time, you end up like, if you want to focus on your business, you're going to outsource that to an actual accountant who does this like day in and day out, knows like the best structure. That's why we're going to have like specialized people and like no code build like software development, which is, just remove the no code and it's just like software development, right? And I think it's going to be a while until we get to that point where it's like literally anybody can create anything. I mean, we're getting sort of there with like these very basic apps with like Adalo and Glide, where it's just like a spreadsheet and choose like a template, and it's pretty straightforward where it solves the problem. But it's really hard to like make that a lot more custom, right? It's a lot harder to turn it into a full product where it's not just a kind of Airtable ++, etc. But I'm really, really encouraged by the progress here, though, because now like people actually are starting to believe that it's possible, which means that there's more competition, which means that there's more like, it's sort of like self-fulfilling prophecy. When we were first getting started, everyone's like, what are you, like the web? You're building for the web? Like mobile is all the rage and this thing is dying and Dreamweaver failed or whatever. The overwhelming assumption was that like this isn't even worth trying, right? Now it's really great to see that we're not sort of like swimming against the current anymore. A lot more people are starting to believe, including software engineers, where they're like, okay, this is just a faster way to do things using the same kind of underlying principles. So it's a good time to be alive. Let's just say that.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting about the learning. Like the process of learning is still the same. If you're learning French or Spanish, you still get to roadblocks at some point where you're like, can't figure out that tense, can't figure out that word. For some reason, that thing doesn't quite work. And the process of learning is still the same. It's just the way and what works for you. Some people are visual learners. Some people are good at languages. Some people can code. And I can't.
Well, what's really important is that it's not just, it is the same way to learn more or less, but you have to learn a lot less. So another analogy I sometimes like to use with programmers is 20 years ago, it was very common that you had to manage your own memory. Like before we had, programming languages like Java with garbage collection, etc. You literally have to figure out, okay, I have, like, in my mind, I have to keep track of how much memory is available. I have to sort of allocate it. I have to know that whether I'm going to like buffer overflow or whatever. There was a lot more. You had to be a lot closer to the computer, like thinking of how this actually like goes down into machine language, how memory management works, etc. And then we added like a higher level abstraction, right? You just sort of like worry about your objects, or like write in a higher level language like JavaScript, Java, etc. And the compiler, or like the virtual machine, just automatically handles memory for you. It has some drawbacks, right? It's a little slower, but for the vast majority of people, it's a lot easier. Like you have vastly more developers able to access that power without having to relearn a lot of the things that the previous generation learned. And it's the same with no code, where you're kind of learning the same principles, right? You still have to respect the medium that you're building for. And that's why you have to understand like data modeling, you have to understand the box model, you have to understand how the browser works, etc. How data flows from different places. But you no longer need to know like, okay, how do I bootstrap an environment to upload my like CSS file, right? And how do I get it to transpile to something that has like prefixes that work in multiple browsers? Like all that stuff is just gone. Just the same way that higher level programming languages abstracted away a lot of the, like it just lets computers do that stuff. And I think that helps a lot of developers sort of get the idea that, okay, this is just another layer of abstraction. This isn't like a devaluing of the practice. It's just another step in creating better tooling for software development.
Yeah, I think it's probably similar in that we get loads of questions around, okay, I couldn't build this app before, now I've built it, so how do I get users? I'm like, well, all that is the same. Like,
yeah,
I'm not.
Yeah, it's like Shopify made it easier for you to make a store, right? They don't magically make you have a good product and get good at marketing.
No, exactly. Yeah, so it's funny to see that. And on the sort of point of education, I was lucky enough to come by the office and see the Webflow University, like behind the scenes of, oh my God, there. It was, yeah, I mean, it was so impressive to see and meet the team there. How much has that been a big focus for Webflow, and what are you trying to do to make sure that remains a big focus? I think so many people just maybe don't even talk about it so much, but some people just absolutely love that was a big part of the process.
It was a little accidental, to be honest. So what happened was kind of the power of our community. One of our users was this guy McGuire, who ran an agency, and they were doing like video production, website production, and they discovered Webflow and kind of were on the forum, or he was on the forum, kind of asking questions. And at one point, we had an education team at that point, but it was very small. It was like one person creating videos, like tutorials for when we were launching new things. It was, I would say, like a very modest operation that we weren't really investing into. It was like, what's the bare minimum we can do? And then there was like this forum post where McGuire created a video, and it was hilarious around, better breakpoint management. It's almost like a pro tip type of video.
Yeah.
And it was so good. Like it got, I'm going to try to find it on the forum. We were just laughing at some of the little quirks. Like he sort of composited it in an Apple Watch as one of the breakpoints, even though we didn't have it, and just had a bunch of like Star Trek: The Next Generation jokes and things like that. So we liked it so much that we just tried to get him on the team. That didn't work because he was kind of running this agency. And over time, we just decided to work with that agency as a client, to do a series of tutorials in that style. For sort of like a broader curriculum. So we started working on that. We worked on that for like close to 9 months, released the first big version of Webflow University. And it was so fun working together that at the end of that, it was just like, okay, it makes sense for us to do this full time. You're enjoying doing this full time. And it was kind of a natural fit. Like, I think that sort of dating period of working, collaborating with the agency was a great transition. And then we started investing into that, but it was really hard at our last office. Like we had to, um, literally rent hotel rooms at the very top of, close to Salesforce Tower or whatever. So you couldn't hear the road noise because San Francisco is so loud. You would start recording, 3 minutes later, there's like a fire truck or something. And it was really, really hard to keep producing great content, especially for audio. And when we were moving offices, it would like really made sense to double down and invest in this. And we didn't really like this is all like IKEA stuff. Like all the books you see in the background, they're totally fake. They're just like printed out with puns and
when
employee names.
when they told me that, all I heard was, "Oh yeah, these are all books written by the Webflow team," and I was like, "Holy shit! There's no way each member has had to write like 20, 50 books." And it's only after that I realized it was just the spines of the.
Yeah. It's just the fake spines, and some of our team members have written books, which is really impressive, but definitely not to that degree. And yeah, it's been over the last many years. It's been something that you kind of hear qualitatively, like this is what gets me to sign up. This is what makes me successful. It's really hard to track, to be honest with you. Of like, okay, how much does the university actually get people to engage and subscribe and upgrade, etc. So it's been like we're trying to get better at that, but it's like this fundamental belief that education, especially for a new category, is so important and right now we're working on a ton of videos to like, how do you integrate with Zapier? How do you integrate with all of these other tools that help you go beyond Webflow, and build like more complex no-code tooling and solutions, etc. We just believe that in the absence of that, we wouldn't have had the growth that we had. It's even though it's harder to track and attribute, it's still like anytime people watch these videos, especially with the humor that's infused in them, it just feels like the Webflow brand. Like that's the quality that we stand for. That's like the kind of team that we are. I always get I crack up when I watch those videos. Like now there's like emerging trends in them, and it's sometimes I even watch it with my kids just for entertainment.
Fair enough. So it's funny that you said that you're producing videos on like the wider, like not just Webflow. Obviously, that's what we do, semi-do. And
well, not wider. I think it's like, how do you integrate those things to Webflow? So it's still centered around Webflow for sure.
Yeah. So I was going to just ask, like, it seems to be, especially in no-code, like Glide have their own university, or I'm not sure if they call it that. Zapier have their own like learning resources and everything else. I don't know if I'm just noticing it now because I'm in the no-code education space, or whether that is the thing for a lot of like tooling for maybe dev tools or something.
Yeah.
Have you seen? Is that just something I'm noticing now, or is it like a standard thing where people really invest and put out a lot of content for education and learning?
I mean, it's honestly, so there's a couple of things that drive this. One is business-wise, it's a lot more effective than doing customer support one-off. So you want to, as much as possible, provide resources for customers to resolve issues and kind of like learn at their own pace, etc. So it just makes business sense, right? Like if you don't have good educational content, that means the only two vectors there is you have to hire a lot more people for customer support, which gets expensive, or you have to put the burden on customers, like just figure it out, right? Like hopefully the product is, and all of these things are so complex relatively to something like Instagram that it's really not consumer grade. Like you need resources to help understand the complexity behind the stuff. So it's almost like a must have. It only depends on the level of investment and quality that you shoot for. So I think it's just like having or at least I think about this, it's just like having a community forum, right? It's just a must have. Like it helps bring, it's a good value add that if without it, it's harder for people to find the help that they need. So I don't want to say it's a must have, but it just makes perfect business sense to have an investment in that area.
So should have.
Yeah. And By the way, I think now what I'm seeing is, with MakerPad, with like, what was the other one? Like, there's a visual developer school.
Yeah, yeah, Visual Dev School.
Yeah, visual dev school that, it's almost like the lynda.com and the egghead.com that existed for other skills are now starting to emerge as, how do we tie all these things together, and how do you learn this as a holistic practice rather than like a tool-based approach? Because, this is something that will never be centralized to just one company. At least I hope not. Even though it would be
Yeah.
good for us, it's something that there's just no way one team can provide all this functionality. So it's awesome to see this industry starting to expand so quickly.
Yeah, and I spoke to Joel from Egghead
Hmm.
before I went full time on MakerPad, because I was like, how do we do what you've done but
Hmm.
for no code stuff? So yeah, I had a really
Hmm.
interesting chat with him. But yeah, I also think there's lots of tutorial companies, and like there's always going to be, because anyone
Hmm.
can do it with a very, like, just a laptop. It's easy enough.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
but it's interesting to see that people like different styles of learning, different like styles of
Hmm.
tutorials and things like that, and different levels of what you put out.
Yeah, the cool thing about education companies is that they could be, if you do it right, really scalable, right? Like usually when you are a service, right, like you're a service provider as an agency to create, applications or sites or whatever, you kind of are limited by the number of projects that you do. Whereas education and content, it's a little more like software, as once you created it, if you figure out a way to scale it, you can actually get additional value basically without additional input from you. So that's something. I mean, that's why you see like lynda.com
Yeah,
selling for like a very hefty chunk of money, because
yeah,
you can, create one tutorial and or like masterclass, etc. There's a lot of value there.
yeah, for sure. And I think we're testing it with like the different stages of getting started with no code. So we've got
Hmm.
3 different boot camps. One is for that.
Hmm.
One's for building a business. The other is sort of automating at work.
Hmm.
And on that, I'd love to know what you see people using Webflow for, either in those sort of 3 buckets. Like, what are some cool stories that we don't ever hear about? Because it seems like lots of people using Webflow are successful in themselves, and they
Hmm.
go out and talk about it and rave about Webflow. But what are some of the stories that we may not have heard of?
Well, there's so many. Uh, it's kind of like a blessing and a curse. I hear so many of them that it's hard to remember specific ones.
Yeah.
Just the other day, we had somebody that contacted us from a very large, Fortune 500 that I was surprised they even use Webflow. And they were saying like, okay, some change that we made broke IE 11. And totally understand that IE 11 is not a modern browser anymore, et cetera. But here's what Webflow means to us right now, working at this Fortune 500 that can't upgrade past whatever Windows 7, where 50% of our user base is on this. Like this, there was a pretty compelling story of like how much value this one designer is providing to the organization, like literally in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Of like what this is saving us, and this bug is holding up everything. And I can't be like too specific about that
Yeah.
like company name, etc. But there's if things like that bubble up, like who knows what the actual value that tools like Webflow are delivering behind the scenes. There's always like I always love telling the story. I don't know, maybe some people might be hearing it for the second time, but or 10th time. But one of my favorite organizations is New Story Charity. Like it was just a few people that visited Haiti after an earthquake and saw like the devastation of what happened there. And they were working at a design agency and another company, and they were able to just like bootstrap validate whether they could raise money for these families, right? They built something just like Kickstarter. It looked like Kickstarter, but was actually faked with Webflow
Yeah.
early on. They would log in and like update the slider of how much money they raised manually, like the
Yeah.
div
Yeah.
block. And like stories like that to me are just like a 0 to 1. Like that might not have existed whatsoever, if they didn't have the tools to be able to validate it in the market. And now it's like, a pretty massive nonprofit organization. They're like 3D printing houses in Mexico and Haiti, etc. So that's honestly one of my favorite stories that always stands out. And I don't know if you saw, you must have seen like the PlayStation 4 rebuild in Webflow. That's not
Yeah.
necessarily like a customer, like something that provides a ton of business value, but to me is like, holy crap, this is next level. Like we never imagine as somebody creating a tool that, honestly, I created Webflow initially to help myself build like dentist websites and orthodontist websites, like
Yeah.
form submissions and like a list of coupons, right? That was the extent of like my imagination of like the capability of it. And then people stretch it to such a degree that it just unlocks creativity, and like their mind goes racing, and they're now able to do something that they weren't able to before, which is the most magical thing about creating tools. You get to see like the impact that has on individual lives, and what people are able to create, get out into the world. So that's um, we just did a bunch of customer research, and interviewed a bunch of customers, and sort of created this internal video for people saying like what this has meant, what discovering Webflow has meant to me. It just like gives me, almost watching it gives me so much pride, but also a lot of pain, that okay, people are talking about this aha moment that they had, right? But it took them 7 years of Webflow's been around for a long time,
Yeah.
like 7 years to even overcome this idea that it's just a website builder, right? They start seeing it as like a visual development platform, etc. It just makes me think how many people could be benefiting from it now that just haven't even discovered it.
Yeah.
So it's definitely both a positive and like a dang, let's get this into a lot more hands
Yeah.
as quickly as possible. Not even from, to be honest with you, not even from like a monetary perspective. Like even if they're using a free plan, I don't care. Like I just want people to create awesome stuff. Um,
Yes.
so that's it.
Yeah. So what
Yeah,
exactly
sorry.
like what you said, in that a customer just creates this PlayStation site and you don't even know about
Mhm.
it. You haven't like
Yeah.
sold that person to then get them to come and
Yeah.
do this cool thing. They just
Yeah.
like, it unlocks the fact that this creative person could do that thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so what is like? I heard about the early story of Webflow's users and getting Hacker News signups and things like that for
Hmm.
sort of your first type of customers. And you're saying
Hmm.
that there's like Fortune 500 companies using it. There's freelancers, agencies, there's no coders. Like, what has been the strategy, if any, of a it seems sort of bottoms up style stuff, but like from an outsider, it looks like it's just that every designer who's ever used Webflow goes around saying, "Stop using anything else. You just got to use Webflow." So, like,
Well, we get a lot more data than that. Like where,
yeah,
we get a lot of when people cancel, we get, qualitative stuff around why they're canceling, etc. People definitely have a lot of frustrations with Webflow, and we have a lot to improve there. And certainly there are some situations where they switch to different tools. Um, but yeah, it's definitely a challenge to create such a horizontal product that serves so many different purposes for so many different people, because then you have to find a way to like talk to pretty much all of them, because the message is different for like
yeah,
a person running a marketing department to a person trying to start a business around web design to serve clients' needs, to a startup co-founder that's just like one of two people and they have to get something up to like tell a unique story, or somebody that's starting like an e-commerce business and wants to sell shoes or whatever. um, so that's certainly, I want to be honest with you, like there's no defined strategy like right now, but it's something that we're working very actively on. We actually have a new marketing leader coming in mid-February, where a lot of that work is actually going to start being executed. So but again, we have to like really get focused, and we probably have to focus on 4 or 5 kind of use cases or
yeah,
personas, or like jobs to be done that we can't cover everything, and then sort of expand from there, because we only have so many people to work on unique marketing for each, a unique marketing message for each persona, etc. um,
yeah,
and this is something that I've seen a lot of no code companies have challenges around. I was talking to the Parabola folks, and it's the same, right? You can use it in so many different ways that you have to like have an ad for IT people, and then have an ad for a product manager, and have an ad for a developer, etc. So it's really hard to manage that stuff at scale, especially as you're starting out fresh.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the challenge we have in, okay, we can make a tutorial. What can we make it on? It could be basically anything and any job
Mm-hmm.
role for any
Mm-hmm.
type of person. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we have
Yeah.
similar struggles there.
Yeah.
So with like, it seems like there's a bunch of white space between people who aren't technical, who have ideas, and the traditional sort of VC
Mm-hmm.
backable
Mm-hmm.
businesses. Do you think we'll see different things emerge here with like the no code space, and maybe more people realizing or accepting the fact that 500K to 10 million a year is actually like a fairly decent business? And
Mm-hmm.
then do you think there's sort of more funds to be like created, maybe like Earnest, that like look
Yeah.
at these people? So then there's like a whole new ecosystem of
Yeah.
makers and creators built around these things.
Totally. Like I think it's very similar to what Shopify did for e-commerce, right? It just democratized people to start their own businesses without sort of the traditional cost of the infrastructure to roll kind of your own environment, et cetera. And in a sense, Webflow and other no-code tools do that for a much wider array of problems, right? Not just e-commerce, but maybe you want to create a subscription business. Maybe you want to create a tutorial business. Maybe you want to create like a social network that maybe has, or a community that has a paid component or not. Maybe you want to create something like a product hunt, but for ranking nonprofits or something like that. That's not even revenue generating. There's so many of these ideas that once you get the tools into people's hands, once the tools are mature enough, that I believe that we can't even enumerate all the things that are going to be created with it. So almost like when the original 3D animation software companies were putting together, I don't know, Alias or Maya or whatever, or 3D Studio Max, like they couldn't predict what kind of movies or special effects or stories were going to be told with this stuff. Not even close. So I do think that by lowering the barrier to creation, like you need a lot less funding, right? So that means that you can actually like bootstrap a business on the side while having a day job, and then get it to a place where it's generating some revenue. And it just means that you have fewer costs. Means you need less investment, so you really are only worried about replacing your own salary, and then you have a lot of optionality or flexibility around like, okay, when do you decide to like switch from a one-person company to a two-person company once you're making enough revenue, et cetera. And there's nothing stopping these no-code created sort of products and services to be traditionally funded, because you still need the same. You're going to, as you need to scale, you're going to have to solve the same problems that every business needs to solve around like marketing and getting people to know about your product, like basically like user research and product development, and like only a few of these things are actually replaced by the no code abstraction. By far, it's not all of them, right? You're still going to need a finance team at some point and all that stuff. So, but it's just like AWS, right? Like, and Stripe. Before, you had to build these things yourself. Now you get an API, you don't have to hire anybody internally. You had to like rack your own servers and have IT personnel at your company. Now you just get, you just pay Amazon a little bit of money, and then like you just build on top of it. So no code is the same. It just like lowers the barrier on how many people, what you can build with fewer people. And I think that trend is just going to keep going over time.
Yeah. And what do you think of the scalability question? People always ask me, and I always think,
Yeah.
what we use is always I can export everything to a simpler version. If
Right.
Webflow died, I could actually export everything on there, and we've got videos that are on YouTube and whatever else. And then if Airtable died, everything would just go into a really ugly looking Google sheet, but it would be all be there. So what do you think is like a good answer there, or what do you have to tell people?
I think earlier in Webflow's journey, that was a much, more pressing question, because, we weren't profitable. We had to rely on external investors to keep growing and keep operations going, et cetera. Now we essentially have infinite runway, right? Like we have no reason to go away. It's almost like Shopify, right? People had similar concern about Shopify. Like, what happens if I if your store, like if Shopify just disappears, right? Then I will have to manually move all these products into a different platform. Who knows if even a different platform that's comparable exists, et cetera, et cetera. At some point, like you reach a certain level of scale where that's not a concern anymore. Like who's worried about Shopify disappearing off the face of the earth?
Yeah.
Very few people now, a lot more people 10 years ago, right? Like very few people, like even from our own customer support conversations. We went from 7 years ago, people were like hiding any aspect of Webflow, like where like I don't want any of my clients to see any of this, I don't want them being worried, to now it being the opposite, where we hear a lot more stories are like, how do I convince my client to switch over? Or my client is asking me, hey, I've heard about this Webflow company from other businesses and they are having a great experience and it's like stable and secure and fast, et cetera, et cetera. And it'll actually cost me less to run my marketing and all that stuff. So it's becoming a lot more of a pull rather than a push. Like here's all the different ways that like a disaster scenario you'll have to deal with that. So I think it's the same at this point, the same likelihood of like Shopify going out of business or disappearing is like Webflow's in the same category now, where we're not going anywhere. We're heavily investing in our platform. We want to make sure that everyone who has built their foundations on Webflow will keep scaling with us. Like we literally have had zero in the last 7 years, like 0 times that people had to worry about like migrations or security issues. Things just get better in the background over time. Like we've changed our technology stack many different times over the years. And it's not one of those things where you should think of Webflow as a tool that then like has to, you take the output and put it somewhere else and then worry about whether, that output is, that tool is going to disappear. We're essentially an infrastructure layer right now for all kinds of different websites and software. And like, I can't even imagine what it would take for us to go away. Like our product we'd have to like literally unplug the servers for like 7 days to lose trust. That likelihood is not something that I worry about anymore. It used to be a lot more of a fear before, because it was like, okay, what if we do run out of money? Now it's impossible. So it's outside of like, we're talking about coronavirus and global warming and like these are things like macro scale economic. Maybe there might be a world where nobody cares about building websites and we're all like hiding underground from zombies or something. But outside of that scenario, you shouldn't be worried about exporting software.
That's fair enough. And I'll just jump into a quick fire to sort of wrap this up. But I think before that, there's like people even ask like, what happens if I've got 10,000 members on my site that runs on Webflow? Like this, I'm worried about this scalability thing, people haven't got.
We're worried about too. Like it's something that affects us as well, and it's something that we're putting a lot of work into to re-architect our CMS to make it more scalable. Because over time, we're working on memberships now. We're working on ways for people to run entire kind of user systems on top of Webflow. We don't want people to think, okay, like my business can only scale to 10,000 items or whatever. There's some technical issues we need to figure out, but we're fully confident that we'll be able to. So it's a temporary thing. We just don't know how temporary.
Okay, cool.
Right now.
Okay, so some quicker fire questions, and if there's things you can't talk about, you just say pass. We'll ask that. So
I can't talk about that Squarespace.com rebuild in Webflow.
I saw that actually. So you mentioned about memberships and stuff. Is that the next big focus for Webflow in terms of like the product stuff? And
one of them. I mean, it's something that we knew was really important. I mean, if you look at our wish list, it's number one. So we're making a big investment there. We actually started to work on that quite a while ago. So that's a major focus.
So we can perhaps see that fairly soon.
Pass.
Fine. Okay, so when things like that happen, whenever that may be, what about the things that are built around the Webflow ecosystem? So like MemberStack, JetBoost, what Udacity or
Udacity, yeah. Certain things, we talked to those guys pretty much nonstop from the very beginning, like with transparency. There are certain things like user systems that we had on our roadmap, like literally from 5 years ago, kind of in the strategy. Just like CMS, right? It makes sense for a lot of things to be kind of first party, because there's just a vastly better user experience if you could do it just like our e-commerce experience. Other things like with Udacity, for example, like, I don't see us getting into WordPress export as a like a first class feature anytime soon, if ever, right? Like, and for certain other things, like for example, multi-language, we want to build in as a first party, even though it's taken us a while. For things like JetBoost, who knows, it might be years until that's prioritized. We actually want to solve that through our plugin ecosystem, where the JetBoost folks would just build on top of the plugin ecosystem. And there's considering many different ways to monetize that, which is mutually beneficial, right? It like brings them traffic and helps us because we don't have to build it, etc. As long as the quality is high. That's the number one thing that we care about. Is it a user experience and like the reliability and stability that our entire user base can rely on. And if that's the case, then we're happy with like third party solutions. But some things like especially user systems, there's so many things that are integrated into that. Like imagine doing a Webflow e-commerce transaction, right? And then having to tie it, like you need the next feature there is the ability to log in and see my orders, right? We have to build that anyway. It's like it has to happen unless we're like really lagging behind what other e-commerce providers will do. And we want to do that in a horizontally, like in a way that can then say, okay, if you can log into an e-commerce experience, maybe you can log into like a member kind of membership type experience where I have like gated content based on what I paid for, or what I haven't, or what I signed up for, etc. And then kind of expand from there as like the basis of even more complicated SaaS applications, right? Where it's not just like, do I have access to something, but it's a full-on like application that can be like internal or external, etc. That's a much longer type of roadmap, but user systems is one step to get there. That's one thing. Like, it sucks that we can't guarantee like here's a list of use cases that we won't build because there's a lot of things just go on our wish list, right? Unfortunately, everyone's kind of using the wish list as an input because we have it public. So you can see that there's market demand for something like that, but it's also like our own internal customer voice. Like when we do research with our customers, it's clear when something that's like heavily integrated into our product would provide a much better experience than something that is sort of like tacked on from the side. So there's always those things to balance.
Yeah, for sure. What it was worth, JetBoost has been a lifesaver for us. So
awesome.
Yeah, definitely get those as on the plugin marketplace. Yeah. Recently, AppSheet got acquired by Google. Do you think we're going to see no-code tools get acquired, and do you think we're going to see lots more like no-code businesses get acquired because it's maybe easier to take them on?
Yeah, I don't know. I personally think of like one of the reasons we've stayed away from even considering being acquired is because it typically like hampers innovation, right? Like that's one of the reasons Dreamweaver died, even though it was a good outcome for them. It just like you then are not operating on your mission as a company. You're sort of operating on the goals of the company that you're joining, which could be completely different, right? So I do think that there will be a lot more acquisitions because just by virtue of there being a lot more businesses now. Like we've already seen, like I think Twitter acquired a team that was building kind of mobile apps in a no-code way. Like this AppSheet acquisition, there's going to be a lot more. I'm sure there's already been quite a few. I know like agencies that are doing no code are being acquired so that they can be like, operated more efficiently or whatever, like bring in some elements of scale, whether like the acquirer has more clients or whatever. I think that's the natural, like any new industry or any new category that's starting that has a lot of players, like there's going to be some consolidation. There's going to be some, sort of people joining forces and partnering up, etc.
Yeah, for sure. No, I agree. I think it'd be interesting to see how, like, if the flippers of the world come around to like no code stuff and like things geared towards that.
Yeah.
And our final question is, if Webflow existed and you didn't have anything to do with it, it was just another product run by another person who likes dad jokes, what would you be building?
Whew. To be, whew, that's a really great question. I honestly, I'd probably be back in Sacramento building a bunch of websites using Webflow for clients, and I'd be perfectly happy. Because that's what I was doing before, working a day job too at Intuit. And Webflow is the only idea by far that gravitated to, like, this is something I would actually want to invest my life into, to the point where I remember filling out the YC application, and it, down at the bottom it says, like, it kind of a similar question, like, if this idea, if we think that this idea is not good, like, do you have other ideas that you would pursue? And I just remember spending like 2 hours making something up that I really didn't believe in. I don't even remember what it was, because there's like nothing ever reached that that level of, you know, I want to devote my life's work to this. So it's hard to say. I think I'd be living a very quiet, happy life building sites for clients.
It'd be a no-code agency.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks so much for having us, and thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate the conversation.